Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Kellam. Welcome to this week's edition of Encounter. I'm the Parish Associate at Union Presbyterian Church. When we were talking in our planning meetings about Encounter, somehow the idea came up that we were sharing books that we were reading, and I thought, maybe it would be a neat idea for all three Encounter hosts to share some of the books that we're reading. I mean, this could be really a boring half hour, or it could be really exciting because we never sit on the set together. So I'm here. Joe Sellepack is here, the Executive Director of the Broome County Council of Churches, and the Reverend Mark Kimpland from the Endwell United Methodist Church is here. And we have all gone through our libraries to do book reports, and we're going to pretend to have read most of these books. But it might be interesting to find out, when pastors read, often it's in order to build a sermon, teach a lesson. I'm retired, so I do a lot more reading for just pure pleasure now. But let's find out. Let's start with Mark Kimpland. What are your reading habits? And then tell us about a book.
My reading habits definitely are the idea of getting around sermons and teaching and Bible studies and all of that. And I have to share that when this idea came out via email, that boy, I have a great idea, we're going to do this, I kind of cringed because my reading habits in January and February are predetermined. And so I'll kind of jump into that.
Right.
I serve on the Board of Ordained Ministry of the Upper New York Conference of the United Methodist Church, which interviews those that are coming to be commissioned and ordained. With each candidate, there's about 100 pages of reading material between theological questions, Bible studies, mission trips, autobiographies, references, and all of that. And so I knew when I got the email that what I was reading in January and February was 21 candidates, 100 pages apiece, thus my reading.
Yes.
But I want to say a word about that, if I could, because it gives me a unique opportunity to hear from 21 budding theologians, and where they're coming from, and to look at their footnotes and their bibliographies to see who's shaping their theology. And it's 50 pages of that material is theological questions. Describe the kingdom of God, eternal life, your understanding of evil and sin, the sacraments, regeneration, threefold grace, all of that kind of stuff. And when a person comes to us for commissioning, they are to answer those questions theologically. So it's pretty rote, but I look at who's shaping their theology. But 2 years later, when they come back to us for ordination, because they have to serve in the local church for 2 years, they then have to answer those questions in the caveat of, in your practice of ministry, how do you understand? So it gives the opportunity for me to see how their practice in ministry, how they do ministry, has shaped their theology and vice versa, which is really a neat progress as they move through that time and place. And just for those who are of the bent of United Methodism, we are in good hands. We have some candidates and some people coming through the ranks that are very solid in their theology and spirituality.
That's wonderful.
So that's been my last 2 months. We just finished the interviews the beginning of March, and right now my reading habit is really to exhale. because that is two very intense months for me.
Well, we'll move in. We've all bought a pile of books here, which we're not going to all get to probably, but we'll move toward a book in just a moment. And how do you read, Joe?
I read, well, I read a lot. My practice in reading has kind of gone from devotional reading all the way through novels and the rest of that. I read to go to sleep at night. I read. It's for me when I'm thinking about ministers. I think a lot about how the settlers when they came in, the major job for a person who is a settler was to chop wood. You never think about it that way, but they had to chop wood to cook. They had to chop wood to have heat in the house. They had to chop wood. Chopping wood was constant for a settler, right?
Right.
So for me, the active ministry is reading. You have to read. You have to read. You have to explore. You have to go deep into yourself while you're reading. You have to ask yourself serious questions at the same time as you're asking questions of your congregation. Reading is there was actually Barbara Brown Taylor did a lecture once that I listened to this was at the Festival of Homiletics, in which she was talking about the reading life, and she linked it to the minister's life, and said this is the job. Like, just as Mark was talking, I couldn't help but think, he's reading people. He's reading their ideas. He's reading their thoughts. Their thoughts are coming through that. In a similar way, a minister is always reading their congregation. They're reading what their denomination says. That you're reading constantly.
Yeah.
And for me, I read magazines, I read journals, and then it gets exacerbated because basically not only am I reading for ministry, I'm also reading for leading a nonprofit. So I'm always thinking about leadership, management, other kinds of things like that are just outside the bailiwick of just for a sermon.
And reading has changed. I know that you were saying that you often listen to books because you're on a treadmill at the gym. Mm-hmm. I'm using I'm buying books from Kindle. To save money. And I realized that I don't have any space for any more blue books on my shelves.
My wife actually told me I can't bring any more books in the house.
Well, I know. When I retired, I put a few books in a box and took them to church and hoped that people took them. Yeah. And I've still got lots of books that I have someday, at my age, I might still get around to reading them. I'm going to start with one. Speaking of books on the shelf, this is Once to Every Man and Nation, a memoir by William Sloane Coffin Jr. He was known primarily as the person who got people to burn their draft cards during the Vietnam War. But before that, the story is, what an interesting man. He's a concert pianist, or was training to be. He was brought up in privilege. His father was a furniture magnate and was on the board of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. After the Depression, his mother took him to Paris to study and to Geneva. He was an athlete. He was a wrestler. He worked in World War II. He was a paratrooper, and then was about to join the CIA when someone said, oh, by the way, at your uncle's seminary, the one that your uncle is president of, Union Seminary in New York, Reinhold Niebuhr will be speaking. You might want to go hear that. And so he went to hear Niebuhr and then wrote a letter to the CIA and said, I'm not ready to come to work for you just now. I want to go to seminary. Then he left seminary and worked for the CIA in Europe for 3 years. What a fascinating man. And there's so much detail here. I think he's made up half of it. Because, when you look back 30 years later and say this person was wearing this certain suit, how do you remember that kind of stuff? When he married Arthur Rubinstein's daughter, concert pianist, when he married the great conductor's daughter, the great conductor said of William Sloane Coffin, I'm not sure I want a Billy Graham in the family.
Oh my.
And Coffin's retort was, I'm not sure I want a Liberace in mine. So,
touche.
A terrific book about a man that I've met and interviewed. We did a half-hour interview with him back in Richmond, and just really fascinating.
Pastor at Riverside.
Yes, oh, that's right. And, after going, he was the youngest chaplain at Yale, and then he went to be the chaplain of the world for a while, went to Riverside Church for several years, and then took on world hunger and nuclear proliferation.
Yeah, I love, one of my favorite books from William Sloane Coffin is A Heart is a Little to the Left, and it was written just before he died.
Yeah.
It was another one of those memoirs where he he recounted his how for him, when you're talking about Jesus, he has a very conservative understanding of Jesus.
Yeah.
But when he views the life of Jesus, it's always a little to the left.
Through social ministry.
Through social ministry, through making sure that you have inward and outward journey, connecting spiritual holiness with social holiness.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very amazing man.
Just powerful. So that's Once to Every Man, a memoir. It was one of those books on my shelf that I thought, someday I'm going to read that. And now in retirement, I can pull it off and do that. So tell us about a book.
Oh, I'll tell you about the book that I'm listening to. So this is not an actual book. It's my cell phone.
Yeah.
And on my cell phone, I have Audible.
Yeah.
And I listen to Audible while I'm walking on the treadmill. And I'm currently working on a book called I Have 12 Minutes Left, because that's one of the good things about Audible is that it'll tell you exactly how many minutes you have left, right? So I know I have 12 minutes left of this book,
which is about what we have here.
Right. and I
really.
You know, it's called Tattoos on the Heart by Father Greg Boyle.
Tattoos on the Heart.
Tattoos on the Heart. It's an amazing little memoir of his work with gang kids in Los Angeles. He works on for Homeboy Industries, gets these kids involved in larger kinship networks. Outside of that, you know, they become screen printers. They do other kinds of work like that. And I'm reading this book. While I'm reading it, I'm thinking about work that we're doing at the Council of Churches through our Chow Works program, which is trying to connect people with work.
Yeah.
But also trying to connect them with patterns of behavior outside of their what would lock them into lives of poverty, cycles of being told that they can't do things,
right?
All kinds of things like that. And so, alternately, while I'm on the treadmill, I'm going, "Wow." You know, and people, you know, because you're listening to it, nobody else is listening to it with you, right? Yeah. So I'm going, wow, and then he'll tell a touching story, and I'll be crying at the same time. So it's like, you know, that's the way I read books. I immerse myself in the book, and the book kind of comes out through that. So, Tattoos on the Heart by Greg Boyle.
And what a powerful book that combines the social justice issues, but also these personal, heartfelt stories of people who are overcoming.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
Yes. Yeah.
Mark, besides the 2,100 pages worth of theological
other than that,
meandering,
lots of time. I'm going to build three ideas here. The first is we did this as a church, John Ortberg's Soul Keeping. And I'm going to meld up two other ones into this idea real quick, I promise. This book was fascinating to me, and it came in my life at the right time. And he talks about the soul and the spirit and the mind and the body, you know, that whole connection.
Who's he now?
John Ortberg is a pastor and has been a pastor for many, many years. And I forget the gentleman, it'll come to me after we're all done here and such things, who is his mentor and such things, but talks about his mentor in all.
Hybels?
Yes.
Okay.
And the idea of, the thing that touched me with this is first understanding the soul and how he understands that and what it teaches us.
Yeah.
And he talks about the hurried soul. Boy, do I need to hear that.
Yeah, you know it.
The hurried soul, the troubled soul, the forsaken soul, the lonely soul, you know, all of those entities that a soul brings with it in life. Yeah. And the hurried soul was really the one that spoke to me the most. And I've really been very conscious since reading this to slow down.
Good.
To just experience life and to experience what my soul is telling me, which led me in two different areas, and I've got two different books here. It led me to the two disciplines that I've never really understood as disciplines, spiritual disciplines, but they truly are, and they are sleep.
Yeah, that's healing.
And fasting. And so I have a book called Lights Out by T.S. Wiley. And it is a deep book, but it talks about sleep and the gift that God has given us in this sleep. Because I don't know about you, but I talk to so many people who just don't rest, don't sleep. Yeah. And so this book of the troubled, hurried soul and sleep, and then putting in our bodies and the power of fasting, all kind of interconnected with me at the right time. And I probably spent the last 6 months really digesting those 3 books, The Complete Guide to Fasting, Lights Out, and The Soul Keeping.
Yeah.
All kind of intertwined.
Yeah, wonderful. And fasting is more than from just food.
Absolutely.
And that's what we learned during Lent especially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it was Ortberg who wrote an article in which he said that busyness is the enemy of the spiritual life.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's part.
And churches need to know that about their pastors.
Well, yeah.
So that churches recognize the pastor needs that time off. And the pastor who spends his 2 weeks or her 2 weeks of vacation planning their preaching schedule for the next year, that's not a vacation. That's not.
And it's interesting to me when I interview guests. Sometimes I'll ask them, well, what's going on at your church?
Yeah.
And they feel as if they need to fill every moment. So Monday we do this, Tuesday we do this, Wednesday we do this. It's almost like the church schedule leads us to the idea.
Yeah, because that's a reciprocal thing. That yes, churches need to know that about the pastors, but the pastors need to know that about their church too.
Yes, exactly.
That it's not just arriving and being busy, but being
right
in the midst of that.
Yeah.
So our guests today on Encounter are our hosts. Mark Kimpland from the Endwell United Methodist Church and Joe Sellepack from the Broome County Council of Churches, the executive director there, and I'm Jeff Kellam, retired. The Bible's cutting room floor.
All right.
Yeah, that's good.
This is the Holy Scriptures missing from your Bible.
Yes.
And I saw this in the church library, and I thought, first of all, I'm big into cutting room floors because I do a lot of video editing.
You do.
And so, I thought, well, who is Dr. Joel M. Hoffman? And I thought, well, I don't know who that is, but on the back it says Walter Brueggemann likes the guy, so that's good enough for me. But it's, the Bible has between, I wrote it down here, between 33 and 78 books, depending on which Bible you're reading. If you're Jewish, it's on the low side. If you're Orthodox, it's on the high side because they've got a couple of extra books about the Maccabees. So who decides? We know the canon has been set, but there was an awful lot of stuff left out. And why was it left out? For political reasons, for theological reasons, or because there wasn't room. When the Bible, when the things were first written, these holy stories were first written, it was on scrolls. How many scrolls can you carry into the temple? And then it went to parchment, and you bound the parchment together. And again, huge, heavy, you had to leave something out. And so we have our common 66 books, but there's an awful lot of stuff that's left out. So he deals with the Dead Sea Scrolls, he deals with Josephus, the Septuagint, Adam and Eve, their story after the Garden of Eden. And my most fascinating one is Abraham's story, the Apocrypha of Abraham. And Apocrypha, I'm sorry, it's not Apocrypha, it's the Apocalypse of Abraham. The Apocalypse of Abraham. Apocalypse not meaning final end, but insight, revelation, new meaning.
Hidden, veiled.
Yeah, and so Abraham, it tells the story of Abraham as a kid, carrying around these gods that his father was making. His father was an idol maker. And when he took the god of fire and put him down near a fire, this kid said, "You watch the fire for a little while." And the god of fire caught fire. And so young Abraham is thinking, you can't be the god of fire. Fire is stronger than you are. And then he's thinking, my father made these gods. My father must be God. And then he's thinking, no, my father's fallible because he's making these stupid gods. And now monotheism begins to take place, and Abraham has this vision of this one God. So really fascinating stuff, and again, it's called The Bible's Cutting Room Floor, Holy Scriptures Missing from Your Bible. How holy they really are, we don't know, but wonderful, wonderful book, new. So, Mark, your turn.
All right. This one, I do read fiction.
Good.
Didn't really. I got away for a few days after my long Board of Ordained Ministry stuff. My son called me excited one night and said, "Dad, you got to get this book. It's called Lead for God's Sake." And it is a fictional story of a high school basketball coach. A very, very, very successful high school basketball coach whose whole team and whole process of coaching just disintegrates before him, right in front of his eyes. And in that school that he coached was a custodian. that all the kids gravitated to and respected, and the coach just couldn't figure out, how am I losing this team? They're just not winning. They're not together. They're not coordinated with what they're doing. But they all go to this custodian, who happened to be a multi-millionaire CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Left that to do custodial work.
Yeah.
But then it talks about the interaction between the coach and the custodian. And just the pearls of wisdom and understanding that the coach thought it was about winning. And the custodian allowed him to open the door of his soul, that it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
It's what the kids are becoming, it's who you're becoming, it's who we are, and really speaks to ministry.
Yeah.
You know, we have a mission statement: to make disciples for Jesus Christ, for the transformation of the world. But is there something more? Is there something deeper in the midst of what we do as a pastor and as a Christian, as a follower, that's deeper, that we're doing it for the sake of God? Not numbers, not reports, not status,
Right.
but what is it that we're actually doing day to day as followers of Jesus Christ?
So tell me the author again.
The author is Todd Gongwer, Gongwer, and it's fascinating. I read this on the plane, as a matter of fact. I had it done in just a few hours, and it's just a beautiful read. And you can see there's so many spiritual and theological understandings that this custodian gives to the coach that gave to me.
Yeah, and look how Mark ties in Lent and March Madness.
There's only one way to do it.
That'll do it. That'll do it.
So we're talking today about some of the books that the three Encounter television radio hosts are reading. Joe, it's your turn. Pick up a book.
Well, I go back to books that I've already read a lot. So one of actually the books that I read periodically, I've read it about 5 times through the course of my ministry, is Walter Brueggemann's The Prophetic Imagination. But another book that I have since, it's been in the last 10 years, that I've picked up and I keep reading, is this book by Chris Hedges called Losing Moses on the Freeway. It's an amazing, it's a great title, a great book too. So what he does is he talks about the 10 Commandments and how we've missed the point of what the 10 Commandments are about. He'll bring up thou shalt not kill, but then relate it to the environment.
Yes.
Or he'll say, you shouldn't covet, or you shouldn't, and then he'll give a twist to it that kind of brings it to a different kind of meaning. Greed is good, for instance, gets a good play in the book. The idea that Gordon Gekko in the Wall Street kind of thing, he'll pull them onto the carpet because of how they violate the 10 Commandments.
Thou shalt not steal.
Thou shalt not steal. He goes. You got to remember, this is also the guy who wrote the book "War is the Force That Gives Us Meaning." So he was a war correspondent. He'll talk about life in the trenches and about and give how the 10 Commandments influence these war-torn areas of the world.
Right.
Amazing book. It's an old book. Again, you can probably find it still in print, but it is one that I would highly recommend, especially for Lent.
Losing
Moses on the Freeway by Chris Hedges.
Wonderful. We've got 3 minutes left or so. I picked up Inscribing the Text, Sermons and Prayers of Walter Brueggemann. We've touched his name about a little bit here. Retired professor at Columbia Theological Seminary. The opening chapter and the closing words, I think, are aimed at pastors to remind us that the text is what matters. That week after week, text after text, our preaching is informed by these ancient words that Brueggemann has just absorbed. The person who wrote the prologue, or the what do you call it, the foreword, said that it's almost as if Walter Brueggemann goes up to Mount Sinai to receive the next book that he brings down. He has not had an unpublished thought. But this one is his sermons and his prayers. I've heard him speak more than once at Montreat Conference Center in North Carolina, and his prayers were just gems.
Yeah.
They were not off the cuff. We just want to thank you, Lord, for being on. They were, and so some of those are here from Montreat. And then the sermons, of course, are powerful sermons, both on about speaking truth to power, talking about lack, and resourcefulness and stewardship. Just really, I think it's devotional reading, inscribing the text, sermons and prayers of Walter Brueggemann, and it's from Fortress Press. So we're down to 2 minutes.
I'm going to give you a novel, because we haven't really talked about them so far.
You got 30 seconds.
C.J. Box has a series of books on a game warden in Wyoming that I love.
A game warden in Wyoming.
Well, game warden in Wyoming, but he gets himself into some amazing things. There's a falconer, there's poachers, there's all kinds of people that are involved in these big things. There's wind farmers, the whole 9 yards, and they all get brought together into an imaginative framework. C.J. Box is a great writer. I actually see it as being a PBS series at some point in time. But
B-O-X or B-A-C-A?
B-O-X. C.J. Box. Okay. B-O-X.
Great.
He has a new book out right now in March.
Wonderful. Well, this has been really as much fun as I thought it was going to be when we thought we were going to do it. Just for the three of us to be together on the same,
it never happens, does it?
No, rarely. Our guest today has been Mark Kimpland, the pastor at the Endwell United Methodist Church, and Joe Sellepack, who is the executive director of the Broome County Council of Churches, which brings you this program called Encounter. I'm Jeff Kellam, the parish associate at the Union Presbyterian Church. We've been talking today about the reading that we've done, and reading is not dead. Libraries are not dead. Bookstores may be fading, but there are lots of ways to continue the discipline of reading for our own spiritual growth and understanding one another. So I encourage you to pick up a book, listen to a book, whether it's on your device or actually between two covers, which I kind of like to do myself. So the Broome County Council of Churches makes this program possible, and we thank you for being with us, with our thanks to WBNG TV for its production facilities and Town Square Media for airing the audio portion of our program. I'm Jeff Kellam, hoping in the coming week you'll be gentle with people and with yourself.